Coming up on Lawmakers. The Safe Place for Newborn bill clears the Senate. We'll talk with House leaders about why this session is lasting so long. Plus an update on reapportionment. Those stories and more coming up next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers for Monday, April 1st. Here are your hosts, Susan Hoffman and Gerald Bryant.
Good evening, everybody. Also on tonight's broadcast, an update for you on predatory lending legislation.
And Senate Appropriations takes up the big budget, but our lead story tonight, the Safe Place for Newborns Act. That House bill passed the Senate today. It allows mothers to leave their newborn children at hospitals or medical centers within 7 days of the child's birth without the mother being charged with abandonment. Senators Bill Hamrick and Susan Cable are among those who supported the bill, but Cable said hers was not an easy decision.
I'm also conflicted that as a society we have said as a nation and also as a state that it's all right to destroy this life in vitro, but then we wonder during a crisis pregnancy why such inhumanity can arise in young ladies that they would be willing to flush a baby down a toilet or put it in a trash bag.
And I now believe that what is driving this bill is not the answers to the legal questions or the answers to the factual questions, but the hope that a baby's life may be saved. And I believe now that that is enough to vote yes on this legislation.
Senator Mitch Seabaugh was among the 6 no votes. He said the bill would send a wrong signal about people who take irresponsible actions.
Are we concerned for the fact that we're saying it's okay to abandon a baby? Maybe not. It's not okay to abandon a dumpster, but to walk somewhere and as far as to a hospital and to leave a child is abandonment. Abandonment of a baby, especially a newborn, is irresponsible behavior.
When House Bill 360 came before the Senate earlier this session, Senator Mike Beatty offered a substitute that would require women considering an abortion to be informed about alternatives. Today, Beatty withdrew that substitute bill.
Because it's become very obvious to me that a debate and a vote on this floor substitute will not be allowed in this chamber. I support House Bill 360 because it will save lives. The Woman's Right to Know legislation would save the lives and futures of hundreds, if not thousands, of women and their babies throughout this state.
House Bill 360 passed by a vote of 43 to 6. I talked with Representative Judy Manning, the bill's sponsor, about the Women's Right to Know substitute being withdrawn.
I was not notified that they were going to put the amendment on the bill anyway. I asked them to withdraw it, and they graciously did that, for which I'm very grateful, because this bill is not about abortion. This bill is about saving babies' lives, helping desperate young mothers in a situation where they find no other solution, and hopefully it will save babies' lives and give an opportunity for those children to have a placement in a loving family and grow up to be tax-paying adults.
The Senate made a minor change that sends the bill back to the House, where it's expected to get final approval.
Just 5 days remain in the 2002 legislative session, and the fate of a key item on Governor Barnes' agenda is uncertain. This week, the Senate is expected to tackle predatory lending. Last week, the House passed a watered-down version of the governor's fair lending bill. Reporter Hamilton Northcote is joining us now with an update on this. Hamilton.
After last week's House vote, the Senate Banking and Financial Institutions Committee, chaired by Senator Don Cheeks, approved a full-strength predatory lending bill. Senator Cheeks says the Senate will not pass a weakened version, though plenty of lobbyists for the loan industry are seeking concessions.
I'm out here watching the halls, and they're working hard to try to continue to amend it. It'll be more difficult to amend it in the Senate because we have already passed predatory lending in the Senate last year, the year before, and the year before. Some form of predatory lending has passed for the last 3 years up to this year. In addition, Mark Taylor, on the very first day of this session, said he would not accept a bill that would be any weaker than Senate Bill 70 as passed last year.
And Senator Cheeks says the House bill is considerably weaker. That may be the result of confusion over an amendment.
The main amendment was the Massey Amendment that the mortgage brokers wanted, that really allowed lenders and brokers to hide fees that are being charged to the borrowers by moving them off of the regular side of the closing statement and putting them kind of in an isolated area. I call it the Arthur Anderson counting on an Enron balance sheet is what they were trying to do. And I think maybe a lot of the members didn't understand exactly what the effect of that amendment was, and they voted for it. That hopefully will stay out as it goes through the Senate. Hopefully we'll have a stronger bill when it comes out of the Senate than what came out of the House.
Senator Vincent Ford, who has worked on this legislation for the last 2 years, says the loophole that Charlie Smith was talking about is large enough to drive a truck through. Reporting live from the Capitol, Hamilton, Northcott, Lawmakers.
Hamilton, when do you think the Senate is expected to vote on this issue?
Senator Don Sheik says there's a possibility it could come up tomorrow, but Wednesday is more likely.
Okay, thanks very much.
Along with the budget, redistricting has delayed the 2002 session considerably. Legislators are still waiting on the federal court's decision for Georgia's reapportionment maps to return, and that day is still unknown. Lawmakers David Zelski, who talked with House Reapportionment Chair Tommy Smith, is standing by live from the House chambers with more on that issue. David.
Well, Gerald, the court's decision was originally expected by the end of March, but now it's April, and Chairman Smith says that a decision must come in the next few days in order to avoid another special session.
Down here into April, that during my 23 years, and I'm not sure if we've ever gone that long, but again, it was dictated to some extent by the courts. But I will say this, on a bright note, we're really ahead of where we were 10 years ago. We had just 10 years ago resolved it with the Department of Justice and still had all the court trials ahead of us. And it was well into the next term before we ever got the issues resolved last time. So at least this year, we hopefully will get a resolution from the federal courts this spring sometime. And then should there be other court decisions, and we'll have to deal with those at the time.
Now, the House and Senate decide to take this Thursday and Friday off. Another couple of days of cushion could be added on, but as of right now, a special session appears very possible. Reporting live from the House chambers, I'm David Zelski for Lawmakers.
Thank you very much, David.
Again, it is day 35 of the legislative session. By most accounts, it's been rather lackluster, not to mention long, thanks to the state budget and, of course, reapportionment. Representative Calvin Smyre, who was chair of the Democratic Caucus and House Rules Committee, spoke with me earlier today regarding the latest on both of these holdups and where lawmakers go from here. We start with reapportionment. If it comes down to just changes in the Senate maps, the feds decide just the Senate maps have to change, are you in a position to pass that out and get through with the reapportionment maps this session without calling a special session?
It would be our intent to be able to pass a bill that would make the necessary corrections to whether it's House or Senate and send it back to Washington as quickly as possible. That's our best hope and our best judgment without having a special session. So therefore, if we get something in a very timely fashion, we have 5 days to go, and if we can get something back, we have dummy bills that are ready for legislative consideration. So if we can get something back within the next day or two, then we can take some sort of action. Anything short of that, I think we're going to be in special session.
Looking at the budget for me, there are not too many differences between the House and the Senate on the 2003 budget. What specifically, if anything, is going to hang that up?
Well, you know, anytime you get into the differences of the funding as it relates to the House and Senate, there are always going to be a list of things that we don't agree with at the outset. But I think with our conferees getting ready to be appointed on Wednesday, and the fact that we may or may not be in session on Thursday, it looks like that we're going to take 1 or 2 days off this week and then come back and adjourn either Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. It appears that we can work our differences out and then have a day to bank on. So with that in mind, I think that the Senate Appropriations is meeting tonight, and hopefully they'll have a bill out of the Senate on Wednesday. Then we can appoint the conferees, the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor can appoint the conferees, and they can be busy working on Thursday, Friday, the weekend, and we'll be ready to go on Monday or Tuesday.
All right, and with that, I need to say thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time, Representative Calvin Smyre.
It's a delight to be with you at any time. Thank you.
We also talked with House Minority Whip Earl Earhart about the longest General Assembly in memory. Representative Earhart, it is day 35 of the legislature and opening day for the Atlanta Braves. That's never happened before. From your standpoint, why is this session taking so long?
It's taking so long because it doesn't seem that the court wants to agree with the Georgia House and Senate on reapportionment. It seems that both maps are still in play, and for good reason, because they don't meet the standards that should have been met with the Justice Department and that court.
It seems that the strategy on part of the legislature or the governor has been to reserve some days to try to deal with that court decision, whatever it is. But now we're looking at only a few more legislative days and still no court decision. Even if the court hands down a decision now, is there going to be time to readjust those lines?
I'd submit that there's not enough time, and it's a shame that we've drawn out this session, inconvenienced the people of Georgia and their elected officials, and cost the state a great deal of time and money with staff costs and everything else over the last 4 months.
In my experience, by the end of the session, tempers are getting a little frayed and things are getting a little tense. Running this long, is that causing any problems or any additional delays in the legislative process simply because people have been here so long and have been home and come back so many times?
Gerald, I think there's no question about that. Their tempers are frayed. It is a tense situation. Many bills in committee just seem to engender a lot of debate just because of that fact. It's not a pleasant situation.
This is, of course, an election year, and people in the General Assembly who are running for a General Assembly seat or a statewide office are not allowed to raise funds, campaign funds, during that time. Have you heard any talk about the effect on the campaigns and the elections because of the long session?
Certainly so. That's an undercurrent down here, especially those who have contested races and who have had opponents out there raising money for 6, 8, 10 months. Many of these people, especially statewide candidates, are having a significant problem with the continued interminable session.
Is there any reason to believe that the delays are hurting Republicans or Democrats more? Are they being hurt equally by the inability to raise funds?
I'd say they're probably being hurt equally. There's no partisan advantage to keeping one side or the other here.
Reapportionment aside, if that can be put aside at this late date, are there any Republican initiatives that have seen the light of day and have passed that you can talk about during the election?
We certainly had some success this year. The minority leader has had some success with some of the homeschool initiatives that he had. We've had many individual Republican successes with legislators bringing their things. So more than anything else, though, it's our success in stopping what we consider poorly conceived legislation.
Early on in the session, you in particular and other Republicans were talking about Hartsfield Airport and the desire to do something there as far as a regional airport commission. Remind us what happened with that bill?
That effectively was killed in committee. It received a hearing, but it didn't receive a vote. That's probably the biggest disappointment of the session, with the revelations that have been out in the media for the last 2 months subsequent to the bill we introduced. You'd think there'd be an outcry to change some things. Well, there's not. It's just too much big money in the Democratic coffers, just very candidly, that is keeping that from happening.
Final question. There's still some of the governor's initiatives out there that have not cleared both houses. Any danger of any of that legislation not passing before the end of the session?
Doubtful. Generally, the governor's initiatives pick up a momentum of their own in the last few days.
Okay, Representative Earl Harahart, Minority Whip, thank you very much for joining us on Lawmakers.
My pleasure.
The Senate Appropriations Committee today approved its version of the 2003 budget. And Wandi Lawson is going to join us live from the Capitol to explain why it will take a conference committee to finalize this budget. And Wandi.
Well, Susan, you mentioned earlier that there are a few differences between the Senate and House versions, but today the Senate committee chairs reported about those differences that they had with the House version of the 2003 budget. Among the changes they recommended, a recommendation to provide $250,000 for county indigent defense grants. Senator Greg Hecht explains.
We did provide for a bump or an increase on those funds that go to the counties. As we all know, that the Constitution requires for indigent defense. We feel like we're building a hole by going through the lowering that has been occurring with indigent defense, and felt like, so as not to put a bigger tax burden from the property tax payers, we would increase that fund.
Now, the committee also decided to replace funding for a life skills program in the Department of Juvenile Justice. A $50,000 replacement was suggested for the Holistic Stress Control Program. Senator Greg Hecht told his colleagues that he initially was reluctant to fund that program, but he'd come to appreciate its benefits.
The best thing this organization could do would change its name. Because, to be honest with you, it really is, I cut that program a little bit in the previous budget and had made some information requests on it. When I got the information request, I believe I made a mistake previously in cutting it, because they do some interesting life opportunity skills for children so they don't return to DJJ.
Now in education, Senator Richard Marable spoke of the need for $3 million for the America's Choice program to improve underachieving schools. He also said that program would keep students from fleeing their home schools.
We need to make sure that our failing schools are getting all the help that they can to help us with the potential of all the transfers that could happen with the parents choosing to go to another school, which will have a real large fiscal impact as far as classrooms and other things if we have a mass exodus out of those schools.
Now, Senator Joey Brush introduced an amendment to eliminate the America's Choice program, and then Senator Phil Gingrey also attempted to add a 20th step to the teacher's pay scale. Both those amendments failed. The 2003 General Appropriations Act was approved by the committee and now, of course, moves to rules. The Senate Appropriations Committee also agreed today to change the criteria for small and minority businesses. Supported by the Department of Administrative Services, House Bill 1162 would define a small business as one that earned less than $10 million per year.
Many small businesses do fall under the $1 million annual gross receipts threshold. What we are finding, however, is that there are also many emerging small businesses that desire to compete with the state for some of our bundled contracts relative to transportation and technology, that are businesses in arenas such as construction and technology, whereby very much a small business at a $10 million level.
Now, that measure was approved with an amendment from Senator Charles Walker, which lowered the annual receipts for a small business to $2 million per year. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Wandy Lawson for Lawmakers.
Thanks so much, Wandy.
In other news, members of the House Judiciary Committee gave a do-pass recommendation on the governor's bioterrorism bill today. Lawmakers Michelle Horton joins us live from the House chambers with more on that story. Michelle.
Gerald, Senate Bill Substitute 385 is the governor's initiative for establishing better guidelines in a bioterrorist attack. The bill would require officials to report any suspicious illnesses or deaths, as well as animal outbreaks in Georgia. The bill would also regulate the use of vaccinations and quarantines in a public health emergency, and some say this measure goes too far.
We don't like being told that you've got to have this done, you've got to have that done. When I was a little girl, I had scarlet fever, and they quarantined me. They quarantined the home. This works like a charm. Then we aren't afraid that we're going to be taken away from our homes and put somewhere with a lot of people we don't know, separate families, children from adults, from their parents. I mean, these things are frightening to the average citizen.
Now, Representative Charlie Smith said that laws already exist regarding vaccinations and quarantines, and that this bill would better establish guidelines for administering them.
I've listened to a lot of the testimony, and I kept thinking about my Boy Scout days, both when I was a Scout and a Scoutmaster. The Boy Scout motto, this is a be prepared piece of legislation. We have no earthly idea what kind of diseases are going to be the implements of war or bioterrorism. We have no idea at this moment what kind of inoculation or vaccination or process is going to be needed, but there needs to be some sort of framework in place, some thinking ahead of time.
Now, the House Judiciary Committee gave a due pass on the substitute with a vote of 10-2. Reporting live from the House chambers, I'm Michelle Horton for Lawmakers.
Michelle, quick question. How long would the rules established during a state of emergency remain in effect?
Well, Gerald, according to this bill, the emergency would remain in effect throughout the duration of the emergency and could last no longer than 120 days.
All right. Thank you very much, Michelle.
The House says yes to a bill which allows state law enforcement officials to transport foreign prisoners out of the country. Representative Terry Bernard presented the bill, Senate Bill 389. He said that Georgia was one of 3 states not in line with federal prison transport statutes, and this would bring Georgia in compliance.
Is it your understanding that your intent with this bill to have the state of Georgia start to get involved in international treaties?
What this is actually, Representative Franklin, is simply enabling legislation that would allow the governor or the Department of Correction to enter in a treaty, or the national treaty that would allow a transfer of a Georgia citizen who's in a foreign prison back to Georgia, or vice versa if the governor is designated so approves.
So, and if I could ask another question, does on line 15, where it refers to convicted criminal offenders, that would be someone who is a citizen of another country who is convicted here in Georgia, not someone who is convicted there and has fled here for asylum. Is that correct?
It's not exactly. It's actually both. Your first part of the statement is correct. A foreign national who commits a crime in Georgia and is in the Georgia penal system could qualify if the governor or his designees allowed that inmate to be transferred, or vice versa, a Georgia citizen who committed a crime in another country, and obviously we were asking for them to be extradited back to the state of Georgia.
Is there any cost involved in us?
There is no cost if, for instance, obviously, if Georgia was transferring its own citizens back, we would bear the cost. But if a foreign country were transferring from us to them, they would bear the cost.
Representative Chuck Sims tried to use the bill as a vehicle to place certain restrictions on private prisons. Representative Gerald Green from Stewart County said that Sims' restrictions could hurt private prisons, which create many jobs for rural counties. Here's Green.
The people down in my area in Stewart County, the average per capita income is $8,500 as compared to, in some of these areas up here, $44,000. We need something that is stable down in those areas. And if you pass this morning, this may kill that opportunity for Stewart County.
Sims' efforts to impose restrictions on private prisons failed. The bill went on to pass by committee substitute. The vote on that was 161-1. Due to the committee substitute, the bill goes back to the Senate.
The House votes to give Department of Transportation workers or their families $25,000 if the worker is killed or permanently disabled while on the job. The bill, Senate Bill 61, passed easily, but not before many questions.
Do they also receive workers' compensation for their death in the line of their work?
No, sir. When you're dead, well, you don't get workers' compensation.
Don't you have a death benefit that's paid under workers' compensation?
I'm sure you do.
Yeah. But I mean, this bill
would be in addition to the workers'
would be in addition to that part of the payment.
Yes, sir.
And the payment is only made as a death benefit. You don't have disability benefits?
Permanent disability, yes, sir.
It is permanent, okay.
Yes. Representative Ann Mueller wanted to know why, if firefighters and other state employees who work under dangerous conditions receive $75,000, DOT workers did not get the same. Here's Mueller.
And then what is the rationale for giving a highway employee only $25? They're just as precious to their family as the firefighter's family is.
I agree with you 100%, but we did not have the money this year. Hopefully next year or future we can bring it up to the others.
Well, that's kind of a shame. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Isn't it true that all your bill does is just brings the Department of Transportation employees that work under hazardous conditions, just like some of these other professions, brings them on a limited basis? And as the lady from Savannah was saying, we wished it could be more money, but without your bill, they won't get anything. This is at least a start in the right direction to help DOT members who are working under hazardous conditions get a little benefit, just like the other folks that work under hazardous conditions get.
Thank you, Representative Smith. You should have been up here explaining it in the first place.
The bill, Senate Bill 61, passed 163-0. It goes back to the Senate due to the House changes.
And the House wants about $55 million of the sales tax on motor fuel to go to local road improvements. Today, the House passed HB 1523, House Speaker Tom Murphy's bill. This measure pulls the tax money currently going to the general fund and gives it to the Department of Transportation for LARP, the Local Assistance Road Program. Here is House Appropriations Chair Terry Coleman explaining the measure.
Back in, I think, 88 or 89, when we passed the other 1-cent sales tax, the DOT was precluded from getting the 4% of the 4-cent sales tax, which they normally would have done, except by statute, it was exempted. Under Speaker Murphy's bill, this 1 cent, which is not additional tax, simply a transfer of general fund money to DOT, would be allocated for the Local Assistance Road Program, commonly known as LARP. The Speaker has expressed to several of us that he wants to be sure that cities, counties in the future have money to spend for resurfacing of city streets and county roads and this would certainly accomplish that.
Representative James Mills needed some clarification on the bill, as did some other Republicans, most concerned that the bill meant a tax increase. Here is Mills questioning Coleman, followed by Representative Earl Earhart, a Republican favoring the bill.
That 25% of the net proceeds that will be distributed among the local projects, would you mind telling me how that money will be spent, that 25% in that portion of the bill?
The same way they do their LARP money now. The 25% is kind of misleading, but the Legislative Council felt like it should have been worded that way. That's 25% of the 4% sales tax.
So it's really not an entirety of that 1 extra percent that you're
No, it's the whole cent.
What they're doing is just shifting. In other words, they're taking the 1% state sales tax. If you look on page 2, line 34, the 1% sales tax is coming off, and the other is going from 3 to 4. There's a 3% motor fuel tax and a 1% sales tax currently. If you take off the 1% sales tax and add the 3 to 4, you have a net wash for the consumer with respect to the price per gallon of gas. So this is not a tax increase in that sense. I wanted to send that message. I am supportive of this. I think that it's an excellent way to spend local road monies.
The bill, House Bill 1523, passed 163 to 0. It moves to the Senate, but keep in mind, all House bills were to be in the Senate by the 33rd legislative day. However, Speaker Murphy said that Senate members were asking for the bill, and he thought there was enough support to skirt Senate rules to get the bill passed. Today, 2 boys who fought off a would-be kidnapper earned special recognition in the House for their bravery. You may have heard about Prince Louis and Tay Johnson. Prince and his younger brother Tay escaped from a man who tried to abduct them on their way home from Pine Ridge Elementary School a few weeks ago. The boys fought off the attacker, then they ran and told a neighbor who notified the police and the school. Representative Arnold Regis honored the 2 boys this morning for their courage.
It is my honor today to bring these 2 fine young men, along with a neighbor who opened the door, let them in, and called the police to meet with you this morning. They are my heroes, and I hope they are yours as well. They did something that few people, fortunately, will ever have the opportunity to do. This young man saved his brother's life, and I want to commend them and welcome them to this House of Representatives.
And coming up Wednesday on Lawmakers, an interview with Chancellor Thomas Meredith, the new head of the University System of Georgia. That's Wednesday night on Lawmakers. For those of you with access to the Internet, you can watch Lawmakers online. Visit our website at gpb.org. Lawmakers programs are streamed live and archived on our site every night that we're on the air. Stay tuned as Rick Steves explores Munich and Bavaria. Travels in Europe is next here on GPTV.
And that is our broadcast for this, the 35th Legislative Day of the Georgia General Assembly. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Susan Hoffman.
I'm Gerald Bryan. Good night, everybody.
Good night.